Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody, to this session on synthetic genomics, the promise and precautions. So in human life, first you learn to read, and then you learn to write. And over the past 35 years, since the initiation of the Human Genome Project in 1990, we've been learning how to read our DNA, with enormous consequences for medicine and for our understanding of ourselves. Now we are setting out to learn how to write our own DNA. The Synthetic Human Genome Project, which launched this June with support from the Wellcome Trust, aims to pioneer the tools and the methods needed for large-scale human genome synthesis. And the potential benefits of this are enormous, with applications ranging from medicine to biodiversity to climate resilience. But this kind of work also raises many questions. It raises questions about who will benefit from these tools. It raises questions about which uses are socially acceptable or socially desirable. And it raises questions about how you guard against misuse by bad actors. Well, today, Professor Joy Zhang is the director of the Centre for Global Science and Epistemic Justice at the University of Kent in the UK, is leading the Careful Synthesis program within the Synthetic Human Genome Project, which aims to answer or to address those questions and to set out the context in which we might approach these challenges. So please join me in welcoming Joy to the stage.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you all for coming. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. And the message I want to get across today is a simple and often overlooked one. That is, the ability to reliably write large genome at scale will transform how life science will be organized, delivered, even thought. This is why we need a new paradigm of public engagement. A form of dialogue that not only engages with the public and informs science and policy, but also have to have the diplomatic competence to bring diverse community closer, if not together. And this conviction actually comes from my 20 years of working with scientists and stakeholders, both in the global north and the global south, and from closely following the field of engineering biology, which focus on the designing, constructing, and optimizing biological system. And over the past 10 years, researchers have been able to synthesize DNA chemically and reassemble it into living system, effectively reprogramming and rewriting the genetic code. And to take this one step further, as our chair just mentioned, earlier this year, at the 25th anniversary of the completion of Human Genome Project, the Wellcome Trust launched a 5-year multi-center research initiative, the Synthetic Genome Project. And the idea is to explore foundational and scalable tools that is needed for synthesizing human genome. And this project will unlock much deeper understanding of life itself, but it will also enable future scientists to be able to carry out de novo genome synthesis with specific functions. And this will potentially accelerate targeted and effective cell-based therapy, and it may open up new realms of research in human health. But of course, it will also lead us to new realms of scientific uncertainties, raise new social expectations, and spark new forms of social contentions. And this is why, at the same time, Wellcome has also funded a dedicated social science program, Careful Synthesis, that I lead to work with stakeholders across the globe so as to work out the social scaffold for the future responsible innovation in this field. The idea is that we want to collectively explore the full potential of synthesizing both the technical and social aspirations with care. And thus the project title. But I want to remind you that synthetic genomics is not just limited to animal cells. Actually, the UK's Agency for Advanced Research and Invention Agency has also launched this synthetic plant program. And the idea is to future-proof our agriculture by dealing with the twin challenge of climate change and food insecurity. And its goal is to synthesize chromosomes and chloroplasts that function in living plants so that it's one step beyond gene editing, because it will be able to endow plants with entirely new capacities. And that will range from reduced water use to protected yields to benefits spanning food, pharmaceuticals, and beyond. It's truly fascinating stuff. But of course, it also reorients our relation with nature. And it calls for reflections of our new ecological responsibility, both to those existing and emerging techno-life forms. I'm sure you agree that to truly future-proof our planetary well-being, we need not only technical inventions, but also conceptual ones. Those will help us to discern what type of techno possibilities we want to embrace and under what condition, as well as what to withhold. And this is exactly the goal of Futuring Biological Commons, another project I lead. And we're working very closely with the sixth research scientific team that ARIA funded under this synthetic plant genomics program. And we treat the idea of biological commons not as a fixed resource, but as an emerging community that's necessarily shaped by stakeholders, both human and non-human. And we consider this approach necessary and appropriate because if you think about the foundational nature of synthetic genomics and this wide spectrum of application, you'd agree that its social ethical implication almost cover the full range of ethical issues we've seen to date. And if you're to ask me, which one of these issues we're prioritizing at the moment, I tell you, you're asking the wrong question. Because different communities have different priorities, all valid and important. But more importantly, even within the same community, their priorities may evolve, and their response to it may also shift, especially when both streams of science I just described to you are still at proof of concept stage. So how synthetic genomics will or will not impact society is something we're literally learning as we go, that is, as science develops. So the urgency and challenge is not simply about opening up the debate and having as many people involved as possible, but about how can we build a conversational structure and the norms to keep that dialogue open. Open to everyone and open-ended. Because we cannot really perceive what the future holds. And just bear in mind, just as synthetic genomics is changing how science is organized, delivered, and imagined, society is in flux as well. And as a sociologist, there are two major social shifts that I want to highlight to you, I think is especially pertinent here. One is a generational shift. That is, with increasing awareness of our shared planetary challenges, such as climate change, biodiversity loss, and resource scarcity, the public perception on engineering biology is also shifting, increasingly seen it as a potential tool for sustainable solutions. For example, last year, the UK's Department of Science, Innovation and Technology did this survey, and across the 5 key areas of application of engineering biology, 70 to 80% of respondents expressed that they're fairly or very comfortable with its use. Wow. However, and this is very critical, however, we all know that this high level of approval rate is likely to fall once those projected applications become real. And now this is not because the public are somehow capricious, but it's because sometimes what the public are really rejecting is not the science per se, but the social relation, a particular deployment of technologies that is perceived to impose on them. After all, when we talk about ethics, we're ultimately talking about having ethical social relations. For example, when we talk about making gene therapy accessible and affordable to patients in need, that is not just a scientific question. It's a social, political, and structural one. And in a world with widening inequality and diverging aspirations, the public is no longer seeking a voice. They're seeking relevance. They want that science and its governance can reflect their lived reality and be able to help to shape it. And this relates to the second shift I want to bring your attention to. And that is the expanding phenomena of what I coined as science at large, which resonate with both the natural and social scientists. In a nutshell, science at large refers to this phenomena where new assemblage of social interests as well as social resource are enabling cutting-edge biomedicine or biomedical research to be conducted outside conventional confines of the public, private, and industry sector. And this increases and sometimes intentionally exacerbates the incongruence between the decision space of how we govern science and the action space of where science can and could be conducted. And this is very different from open science or citizen science because it's not a diffusion of scientific norms, but for better or for worse, it's actually about disruption. It's actually about disrupting the existing hierarchies of values, priorities, and pedigrees that's constituting mainstream science. There are good and bad sides to it, but I highlight one of the worrying side. That is, this is one of the examples. Since 2018, we've seen a number of grassroots initiatives developing copycat gene therapy for the masses, defying regulators such as FDA's warning, because their whole point is about protesting against existing regulatory or market system. And science at large is also very different from the traditional biohacking community because of its resource mobilization and scaling up capacity, as evidenced by Bitcoin and crowdsourcing. So it's a phenomenon that's occupying this curious space between social movement, venture capital, and industry. And these two shifts alone, I think, highlights both the pressing need and timely opportunity for us to rethink regulatory framework so as to better align of how current science is organized and better align with emerging social conflicts. Because these are the things that also make us reconsider science-society relations. Public dialogue must go beyond simply informing or consulting, but have to embed the task of minding and mending the reciprocal relations of social recognition, or what I call a communicative and diplomatic work of cultivating a careful thinking in and for science. To put it another way, just as science is charting new waters, we, societies, we must also embark on a new odyssey for public dialogue, and by which I refer to this framework that's based on 5 principles. That is open, which is both an adjective and a verb, and it has to be deliberative because the key or the aim is not for unity, but about enabling differentiated social uptake, including non-uptakes, as well as enabling science in a way that is sensible and sensitive to diverse need on context. And it's only in this way that we're not just simply applying technology, but we're actively futuring our relation with the world. And this Odyssey framework, you can see the concept paper online. I also have a few copies with us. But what truly makes it distinct is that it is a global initiative. So over the summer, my team and I have been talking to lead thinkers, practitioners, academics across the world, refining this framework and discussing how to translate this vision into actual practice. And a core group of us just met in London about 3 weeks ago. And in the next few years, what we're going to do is we're going to work with local partners as well as scientists to launch this concurrent global dialogue on synthetic genomics. And the idea is to work with different communities so as to monitor how emerging social relations, new, old, disrupted, how those social relationships are actually shaping the field of synthetic genomics, as well as how and where ethical guardrail should be set and under what condition. So in summary, for me, I think synthetic genomics offer a rare opportunity to build something truly different. And that's not just on the technical side, but on the social side as well. And we really need to seize this opportunity to rebuild the architecture for public dialogue so as to be able to recognize, repair, and reimagine social relations to connect the plural realities of our shared future on this planet. So I hope you will join us on this odyssey, because as I always say, the future is ours to share and ours to shape together with care. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. So lots to think about there. But I want to start off with something I know is a bête noire of yours, which is the collapsing of all of this kind of carefully structured discussion into the word controversy, which is how this was reported initially. What's your kind of reaction to that? I mean,
I think these type of scientific breakthroughs, they always raise a lot of questions. But let's bear in mind, those questions can come from very different places. It could be curiosity, it could be excitement, it could be hope, it could also be because concern and worries. It comes from different directions. And we really want to encourage people to ask as many questions as possible. But having questions does not make something controversial. It's opposite. The more questions we ask, the higher opportunity for us to prevent them from being controversial. So I've actually written a commentary piece, again, you can find it online, that I caution against this framing of breakthrough novel technology as controversial. The reason being, many people will be interested in engaging with science, but very few are enthusiastic about engaging with controversy. So by framing as a controversy right from the beginning, you're driving away a lot of the public even before the conversation began. So I wouldn't really use the C word. There are perhaps other C words that, a better C word that we need to use. That's conversation.
and on that note, I'd like to put this open to the floor for questions. We have some mics. Can I have the gentleman there, who I think was the first hand to go up? And let's take, if I can just take 3 at a time. So we can have you, and then the gentleman here, and then the gentleman here. And can we have a bit more diversity, because that's all gentlemen, so.
There's one.
Hi, my name is Gabor Farkas. My question is about money. Who owns the technology? And then when it's being used, to what extent are the user owned by the owner of the technology?
That's a really good question, and I think that is one thing that we will discuss and will emerge in one of our focus group and commenting workshop that we plan to do. But I cannot give you an answer now. The reason is I don't think there's one IP regime in the world. And so who owns it and who can use it and benefit sharing is something that we definitely need to rethink. And another thing is that we also need to rethink, while we have these new structures built, how do we make sure different regions can harmonize their IP system so as we're both protecting the innovation, but also have a fairer and more equitable and accountable way of feeding back to the society? So that's a very, very good question.
Okay. Gentleman here.
Hi, Joy. Thanks so much for the great talk, and I really appreciate the vision and the approach y'all are taking on this project. So I have many questions, but just to focus it for right now, you concluded with the slide kind of showing these different groups around the world. So the first part of the question is, can you just say a little bit more about the specific mechanisms for the types of your conversations you're going to have, how you're evaluating them, and so on? Just a little more detail about that would be great. And then, what are the types of outcomes that you're hoping for from these conversations? And you mentioned again sort of the social dynamics and the relationships between these different stakeholders and the technologies themselves. Like, is there a way that the outcomes of these conversations somehow then lead to agency, lead to like power building, lead to you say this whole thing about shaping the reality. How did the conversations then lead to actual real change happening in the world?
Yeah, again, very good question. Well, in terms of how the dialogue is going to start, there are basically two main action points. We're going to do a lot of background research, but I won't bore you with that. But we're first going to do focus groups. That is, we want to know what are the right questions to ask. The traditional way would be we will launch a survey first, and then we consult the public. Hey, this is what your fellow citizens are thinking. What do you think? I don't think that's the right approach. We first need to ask the society, what should we be asking? What are you really imagining with this possibility? Actually, as a social scientist, I think we should have the humility to acknowledge that we don't yet even know what are the right questions to ask, especially since the science is at this early stage and had that much stake to consider. And after the focus group, we know kind of what each stakeholder are thinking. What we're trying to do is to do what we consider as commenting workshop, and this is what makes me really excited. The commenting workshop is that, borrowing from Eleanor Ostrom, we don't really see commons as a given, but it's something that we need to work towards. That we want to bring different stakeholders together. We need to have them to have conversation. I feel comfortable with conversation, and perhaps develop norms of conversation. And those are what the commenting workshops are aimed for. And to be honest, I think all stakeholders, including different types of public, they're really smart. They know how to solve things. And sometimes a lot of the problem is hinged on we just don't know what the problem really is. We don't quite understand why the other parties are worried. So having a platform to make people understand each other's difference and each other's concern itself can be really empowering. And hopefully by that stage, me as a social scientist, we're redundant. That's the best news for us. If we feel we're redundant and stakeholders can start solving problems themselves. And you're also talking about what kind of, for example, the success indicator we're looking at. And of course, I could give you the standard list of ethical guidelines, policy recommendations, and it could also be regional and national and international. And those, of course, are the things that may come out of this project, but I really do see them as a byproduct. What I really want to see is set up a dialogical culture and norm so people regain the confidence to talk to one another again and to face controversy again and to not be defensive when they want to express their view. And more importantly, I think the goal of public dialogue is not so much about changing a person's mind, but about improving their understanding of different perspectives. Because if you think about it, when we develop science, very few scientists are thinking, I want the whole world live in a specific way. Science is always about expanding our life choices. But somehow when we communicate science, it reads or it feels as if we're imposing these one-way street to everyone. And I think that is something that we collectively need to change our narrative and strategy. I want to retrieve back to our original intention. That is, I'm not here to change your mind. I'm not here to persuade you to accept or reject anything. But here are the possibilities. Here are what some people may make use of it. What do you think? And we have done smaller scale research on stem cell related research in the UK. And I am very proud to say that we have received some very good positive result. That is, even if people don't really change their behavior, they have increased understanding of the society and make dialogue and policy and tolerance much easier.
Can we go to the lady here, please?
Hello, thank you very much for this very insightful and interesting talk. I am Mel from Data Reply, so I am mostly from the GenAI field. And my question would be, how is it tackled at the moment, this biohacking risk, especially with LLMs and generative AI tools that are coming more and more common?
If I understand your question correctly, you're asking how AI will change the dynamic. I do think it will speed up a lot of the research trajectory or projection. And more importantly, I do think it will aggravate the phenomena of science at large. And this makes it even more important to have the kind of dialogue that brings people together. Because you'd be really surprised of how power, because the previous question also talked about power. Power actually not comes from a place of dominance or wealth or technology. Power comes from relations. And this is a classic social theory. Because, for example, some people can be very powerful. For example, Obama is a very powerful person, but he has very little power over me. And my husband may actually have more power over me or my parents because they're relatable to me. And those of you who have children must know this. That is, it seems like the child-parent relation seems to be very one-sided, that the child have to listen to their parents. But boy, think about all those times you have to change your life so as to accommodate your kids' schedule, right? And what is at play is social relation. And the same with science-society dialogue. If we're able to make marginalized society, community or those communities who are normally not engaged with science feel they're part of this discussion. They're part of this enterprise. It actually empowers them. And also, I think it will enrich our scientific dialogue as well. And that relation is a mutual beneficial to both.
Okay. Final question, I'm afraid. Very briefly, if you can, please. We're into our final minute.
Thank you. Andre Villarreal. It's about education. I have young children, and it's interesting that when you talk about controversial, teachers sometimes stand in the way of our youth thinking that some things are possible. So my kid had to write something about, future of work, and he wrote about conquering space and, exploring the moon and things like that. The teacher said, impossible. I said something real in the future of work. Yeah. And who's wrong here?
I don't think anyone is wrong. Because they're just different perspectives, right?
My question was, do we need institutional reform to get some things in a different direction than negation or controversy?
I think so. And also, I think the key is really changing the perspectives here of what are we really after? Because we keep on talking about how science needs to embed social outlooks. But at least in the UK, and I know for a lot of major countries, we actually don't have a feedback loop of how to evidence the public input into science and policy. We have the reverse. That is, how successful we have changed the public mind. So perhaps we need a change of outlook of what are the success indicators for science, for engagement, for policy, and what are we really aiming for? And do we have a space for people to think and reflect? And for example, do we have space to not launch that survey before we're ready and know what we really need to ask?
Okay. And on that note, we're out of time, I'm afraid. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you to the people online. Please join me in saying thank you very much to Joy.